There is a country where a railway company once issued a formal public apology because a train left the station 20 seconds early. Not 20 minutes, 20 seconds, and not a single passenger had complained. A country where, in a single year, people found nearly $30 million in cash on sidewalks, in taxis, on train seats, and carried it to the police. A country where young professionals in one of the most expensive cities on earth join waiting lists for apartments the size of 3 tatami mats. This is Japan. For more than 40 years, this chain of islands was the second largest economy in the world, an industrial giant built on land that holds almost none of the materials an industrial giant needs. And yet, walk its richest streets, and you will find something strange. The cars are small, the homes are small, the voices are quiet, the wealth is everywhere, and somehow it is nowhere. The question that follows you across this country is simple to ask and very hard to answer. Why does a nation that could afford almost anything keep choosing less? On the map, Japan looks like a long, thin blade of islands curving down the edge of the Pacific. 4 main islands, Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, Kyushu, and thousands of smaller ones, stretched across the same distance that separates Maine from Florida. But the map hides the most important fact about this country. Most of Japan is mountains. Roughly 3/4 of the land rises too steeply to build a city on, which means that almost the entire population lives pressed into the narrow plains along the coast. That single geographic fact explains more about Japanese life than any economic theory. When 120 million people share the flat edges of a mountainous archipelago, space stops being a commodity. It becomes a discipline. The Greater Tokyo region alone concentrates tens of millions of people, one of the largest urban areas ever assembled by human beings, on a plain that also grows rice, hosts 2 international airports, and absorbs typhoons on a seasonal schedule. And beneath everything, the ground itself refuses to be trusted. Japan sits where 4 tectonic plates meet and grind. Earthquakes are not a possibility here. They are a calendar. Buildings sway on engineered dampers. Schoolchildren rehearse evacuations the way children elsewhere rehearse fire drills. Every family knows where the emergency bag is. A land that shakes, floods, and burns teaches its people a lesson that no wealthy society ever fully learns on its own. Nothing you own is permanent. Remember that lesson. It returns again and again in the strangest places, including the price of a house. But before the houses, we need to understand where the discipline came from. Because geography wrote the first rule of Japanese life. History wrote all the others. For over 2 centuries, Japan closed itself to the world. Under the Tokugawa shoguns, from the 1630s until the 1850s, almost no one entered and almost no one left. An entire civilization learned to live on exactly what its islands could produce, and nothing more. Out of that enclosure came a mentality the Japanese still name today. Mottainai, the feeling that wasting anything, a grain of rice, a strip of cloth, a length of wood, is not merely careless, but almost shameful. Kimonos were unstitched and resewn for generations. Broken pottery was repaired with lacquer and gold, the crack displayed rather than hidden. Then, within living memory, came the 2 great whiplashes of the modern age. The first was destruction. In 1945, Japan's cities lay in ashes. The generation that rebuilt them worked with a ferocity the world had rarely seen, and by 1968, their country had climbed to the second largest economy on the planet, a position it would hold for more than 40 years. The second whiplash was excess. In the late 1980s, Japan went spectacularly, deliriously rich. Land in central Tokyo traded at prices that made Manhattan look provincial. Golf memberships sold for the price of houses. It felt permanent. It was not. In the early 1990s, the bubble burst, and the decades that followed, flat wages, falling prices, quiet stagnation, became known simply as the lost decades. Think about what that sequence does to a culture. Scarcity, then miracle, then mania, then loss. A grandmother in Osaka has lived every stage of it in a single lifetime. And then, in March 2011, the sea delivered the final lesson. The Tohoku earthquake and tsunami erased whole towns in an afternoon. In the years that followed, a movement that had been quietly growing suddenly found its moment. Danshari, 3 characters meaning refuse, dispose, separate, its best-known practitioner, a Tokyo editor named Fumio Sasaki, reduced his belongings to about 150 items. And his book about it travelled the world. A generation had watched possessions become rubble on live television. Choosing less stopped looking like sacrifice. It started looking like wisdom. So when you see the small homes and the small cars of modern Japan, you are not looking at poverty, and you are not quite looking at fashion. You are looking at memory, a memory of how quickly everything can vanish, written into daily life. And nowhere is that memory more visible than in the way the Japanese live, move, and buy. Start with the home, because in Japan the home breaks every rule the Western world holds sacred. According to the government's National Housing Survey, the average apartment in Tokyo measures 65.9 square meters, and inside the city's 23 central wards, the average resident lives on roughly 19. Barely a third of central Tokyo households reach the government's own recommended minimum of 25 square meters per person. And at the extreme edge of that spectrum, something is happening that most economists would call impossible. A developer named Spilitus has built more than 100 apartment buildings across Tokyo under a brand called Kukuri, and each unit measures about 9 square meters, the footprint of 3 tatami mats, roughly the size of a parking space. The ceilings rise high enough for a sleeping loft. The rent, near districts like Shibuya and Harajuku, runs around $500 a month. 9 out of 10 tenants are in their 20s and 30s. And the buildings have waiting lists. No one is forcing these young people into 9 square meters. They are choosing it, trading floor space for location, for freedom, for a life lived in the city rather than in a living room. In the world's most crowded real estate market, an entire generation has quietly decided that the home is not the trophy. The life is. Now look at what a house is worth here, because this may be the strangest number in the entire Japanese economy. In most wealthy countries, a house is the family fortune. It appreciates. In Japan, the average home loses about half its value within 10 years of construction, and on paper, the building itself is often worth close to nothing within 25. Only the land underneath holds its price. Part of this is regulation. Every major earthquake rewrites the building codes, making older houses feel obsolete. Part of it is preference. Most buyers simply want new. But the result is a country where the house is treated less like an heirloom and more like a vehicle, used, replaced, and not mourned. The Western dream of the forever home simply does not operate here. Permanence, once again, is not assumed. The same logic rolls onto the streets every morning. Japan builds some of the most celebrated automobiles on earth, and more than 1 in 3 new cars sold in this country is a kei car, a legally defined class of minicar capped at 3.4 meters in length and an engine of 660 cubic centimeters. In 2025, Japanese buyers took home 1.6 million of them, led by boxy champions like the Honda N-Box. The nation that exports horsepower to the world drives tall, boxy little cars that fit its streets, its parking rules, and its temperament. But most of Japan does not drive at all. It rides. The trains of Japan are not merely transportation. They are the country's clearest self-portrait. On the bullet train line between Tokyo and Osaka, running roughly 130,000 services in a year, the average delay per train in one measured year came to 24 seconds. Across more than half a century of operation, that line has never suffered a single passenger fatality in a crash or derailment. 24 seconds. It is the number behind that famous apology from 2017, when the Tsukuba Express line publicly asked forgiveness after a train left Minami Nagareyama station at 9:44:20 instead of 9:44:40. The world laughed and then went quiet Because everyone understood what the apology actually meant. In Japan, the system is a promise, and a promise broken by 20 seconds is still a promise broken. And the honesty runs deeper than the timetable. In 2025, people in Tokyo handed 4.5 billion yen of found cash, nearly $30 million, to the police. About 3.2 billion yen of it made its way back to the people who lost it. 4.8 million lost objects were turned in that year, including 338,104 wallets. Of the 144,381 cell phones found, 83% went home to their owners. There is even a system beneath the virtue. Japanese law entitles the finder to a reward of 5 to 20% of the value, and to ownership if no one claims it within 3 months. Honesty here is not an accident of character. It is infrastructure, taught in schools, rewarded by law, and practiced until it becomes reflex. Small homes that are not investments. Small cars from giant automakers, trains measured in seconds, wallets that come back. Piece by piece, a pattern emerges. This is a society that has decided the highest use of wealth is not display, it is reliability. But to feel where that decision comes from, you have to leave the spreadsheet and sit down at the table. If you want to see Japanese abundance, do not look for a mansion. Look at a lunchbox in Ginza. A bento assembled at a neighborhood shop is a small argument about what wealth means. 5 or 6 foods, each in its own compartment, each cut and placed with intention. Rice pressed into shape, a piece of grilled fish, pickles whose colour was chosen on purpose. Nothing overflows. Everything belongs. The luxury is not quantity, it is attention. The same philosophy waits in the convenience stores, the kombini, where onigiri rice balls are engineered so the seaweed stays crisp until the moment of wrapping meets the moment of eating, and where the clerk will angle your purchase toward you with both hands, as if concluding a small ceremony. It waits in the tradition of the seasonal menu, where restaurants and homes still cook by the old calendar, bamboo shoots announcing spring, Pacific Sori announcing autumn, as if the year itself were a tasting course. And it waits in the objects. Japan is the country of the shokunin, the craftsman who spends a lifetime narrowing his skill instead of widening it, the knife maker who only makes knives, the carpenter who joins temple beams without a single nail, using joints his grandfather's grandfather would recognize. In a disposable century, Japan quietly maintains an aristocracy of people who do one thing perfectly. Even beauty itself is defined by restraint. The aesthetic the Japanese call wabi-sabi finds elegance in the worn, the weathered, the incomplete. A tea bowl prized for its irregularity, a garden raked around emptiness. There is a word, ma, for the meaningful space between things, the pause in a conversation, the bare wall that lets a single scroll breathe. Where other cultures fill silence, this one furnishes it. None of this is decoration. It is the same instinct we saw in the 9-square-meter apartment and the 24-second delay. Expressed in food and clay and paper, the belief that perfection lies not in adding more, but in removing everything unnecessary and honouring what remains. And that belief did not come from philosophers, it came from the land itself. Every spring, Japan performs a national ritual that has no equivalent anywhere on earth. From Kyoto's temple gardens to Tokyo's Ueno Park, the cherry trees bloom, an entire country walks outside to sit beneath them, and within 2 weeks the petals fall. That brevity is not a flaw in the celebration. It is the point of it. The blossoms are loved because they leave. The Japanese have a phrase for this taste of beautiful impermanence, mono no aware, the gentle ache of things passing. It is the perfect emblem for a nation whose relationship with nature has never been peaceful. This is a landscape of absurd beauty, the snow country of Hokkaido and Niigata, where drifts bury houses to the eaves, the volcanic cone of Mount Fuji, so symmetrical it looks designed, forests of cedar and bamboo climbing hills into the mist, and the southern islands trailing off into coral seas. And nearly all of it is armed. The volcanoes are active, the rivers flood, the typhoons arrive in season, named and numbered, like relatives. The same sea that feeds the country rehearses, every few generations, the act of taking a coastline back. Living for centuries with a nature this generous and this violent produces a very particular temperament. Gratitude without trust. You honor the mountain, you do not build your house on its patience. You accept the harvest, you preserve, pickle, and store as if the harvest might not come again. Perhaps that is why Japan never developed the fantasy of conquering nature that powered the West. You do not conquer an earthquake. You design for it, bow to it, and rebuild after it. The country's genius was never domination. It was accommodation, and accommodation, practiced for 1,000 years, looks exactly like the humility we have been tracing all along. But it would be dishonest to end the story here, in the falling petals. Because the philosophy of less has a shadow, and modern Japan lives inside it. Begin with the number that hangs over everything. In February 2024, Japan, second largest economy on Earth for more than 40 years, slipped to fourth, overtaken by Germany. Within another year, projections had India passing it too. The yen had weakened, growth had stalled, and the country that once seemed destined to buy the future had spent 3 decades watching the future get cheaper without it. The discipline that makes Japan reliable also makes it relentless. The society that apologizes for 20 seconds is the same society whose language needed a word, karoshi, for death from overwork. The office lights burn late, not because the work demands it, but because leaving before the group feels like betrayal. The demographics are quieter and heavier. Japan is one of the oldest societies in human history, and each year it counts hundreds of thousands more deaths than births. In the countryside, the consequences stand empty by the roadside, millions of abandoned houses, the akiya, shutters closed, gardens overgrowing, entire village schools shut for lack of children. The small towns that taught the nation its values are dissolving into the forests that surround them. Even the minimalism has its honest critics. Spend time in real Japanese homes, and you will find plenty of them cheerfully cluttered. The spotless empty apartment is an aspiration and an export, not a national average. Japan did, after all, invent the capsule toy and the 12-story electronics store. The country that perfected restraint also perfected temptation, and every resident lives somewhere between the two. So the paradox sharpens into its final form. Japan chose reliability over growth, quality over scale, the group over the self, and it is paying the precise costs of that choice. In stagnant wages, in empty cradles, in tired workers on the last train home. The question the modern world keeps asking, was it worth it, assumes there was a version of Japan that could have chosen otherwise. There may never have been. Looking back across the whole journey, the answer to our opening question has been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Why does the country that could afford anything keep choosing less? Because Japan has never once, in its entire history, been allowed to believe that abundance is permanent. The mountains limited the land, the isolation limited the goods, the earthquakes limited the buildings, the bubble limited the dreams. Every generation received the same lesson in a different costume. What you have can vanish. So build what cannot. And what cannot vanish? A train that keeps its promise, a wallet that comes home, a craftsman's standard, a neighbour's trust. Japan quietly moved its wealth out of objects and into systems, out of possession and into precision, where no earthquake can reach it. Japan is not just the neon, the temples, the bullet trains, and the cherry blossoms. It is a reminder that a civilization can grow rich in a completely different direction. Not upward, into towers and trophies, but inward, into care, trust, and the mastery of small things. In a century that measures success by how much it can accumulate, these islands keep offering the opposite wager, that the highest form of wealth might be needing less of it.